One of the interesting things is that the Ottomans themselves, at this point and by the late 16th century, started to think about, well, why are they special? Why are they the greatest in the world? Essentially, this is their own kind of propaganda or justification um, for their rule, as they became clearly the major power in the Mediterranean and across the Middle East. Um, they started thinking about, well, what makes them different from other empires? We've already talked about this in terms of artistic work, about the types of fights, or at least competitions they had with the Mughals and the Safavids, and the dalliances they had in terms of projecting images of messianic world conquerors. Um, but the Ottomans kind of spread this out in different ways. So this is from the historian Talikzade. He was writing around 1593, 1594. And he lists 20 reasons why the Ottomans are great. The first is their unwavering adherence to Sunni Islam. So this goes back to the idea that the Ottomans have now defined themselves as a Sunni polity. And the fact that they're Sunnis, whereas the Safavids are Shi'is, and the Mughals are technically Sunnis, but they have this weird cult around the emperor. The fact that they are Sunnis and that they support the Hanafi law school and that they are attempting to create a legal structure which justifies their reign is perhaps one of the most important justifications for their rule. And this again seals the transition from a frontier polity where there was a sort of state of metadoxy where people didn't even really know what was right and wrong, to by this point, by 1590s, a clear sense that they're Sunni, they're Hanafi, they know what Islam is, it's defined by its legal boundaries, and that they're going to push this upon the population in some way or another, at least indirectly, even if most of the population perhaps doesn't quite care. The second one is this idea that the Mecca and Medina are part of the empire, that they are the servants or custodians of the two noble sanctuaries. As I pointed out in previous lessons, they had conquered this from the Mamluks, and this was a great point of pride and legitimacy for them. This differentiated them from essentially all other Muslim powers, and made them kind of the chief guardians of Islam, at least in their mind. The third takes a different route. It's a continuous dynastic growth. The fact that they are an unbroken line of patrimonial succession, and each sultan being more, adding lands to the domains. So this is a break from, again, the traditional Turco-Mongol way of splitting up the empire amongst all male heirs, which usually ended up creating empires that became smaller and smaller. But two is also just a dig at other empires that failed. And in fact, the Ottomans, between 1300 and 1922, created the longest lasting dynasty in human history. So the Byzantines may have been around for longer, but the Ottomans as a single dynasty continued for the longest period of time. And already by this point, they'd been around almost 300 years. So they felt that they had succeeded in ways that others hadn't. And in fact, most kingdoms fell apart after 2 to 3 generations. So in this case, number 4, they have the title Sultan of Land and Sea, especially bolstered by their conquests in the Mediterranean that transformed the state into a seaborne empire. So here we're kind of pulling in all the conquests that occurred in the 16th century, in which the Ottomans are fighting either directly or by proxy in the Indian Ocean, but also across the Mediterranean, which is probably the more important arena of combat. Number 5, maintaining a strong standing army. No other contemporary dynasty in the Islamic East or in Europe has 80,000 quls, servants, paid full-time by the state treasury, in addition to provincial Timar holders. So we're going to talk about that. But Timar holders are what we call prebendal cavalry, right? They're paid by being assigned land grants, which they then use to collect money to raise a small army, which they bring on campaign. Quls are people who are directly paid by the dynasty a salary. But they have basically the largest army. They have the unequaled prestige of Istanbul as their exalted sultanic capital. No other city could claim its fame or its location at the confluence of the two seas. So the very fact that they're able to be in the central space is important for them. The fact that they managed to conquer it for the first time in Islamic history. This is important. Number 7, the territorial extent of their empire encompassing the 7 climes, in each of which the Ottoman Khutbah was pronounced on Friday. So in medieval and early modern peoples saw the world as divided into climes. I think this also this is based off of Greek visions of the world. So the best parts of the world are in the 3rd and 4th climes, the temperate zones. Whereas in the extremes, the far north and the far south, you have colder weather or hotter weather, and therefore also different character of peoples. The Ottomans, in their counting of it, had basically control everything from Yemen to Buda, and so therefore control, again, a giant expanse of the world in the sense that they control all types of climatic zones. The prosperity in number 8, the prosperity of lands and the riches of subjects in their imperial domains. No other Muslim states possess such a fertile country with uninterrupted prosperous lands and abundance of pious foundations. So economically, they're doing pretty well. Everything's fine. 9, a diverse collection of communities living peaceful under their multi-confessional empire. No other sultanate possessed the capital assembling such a variety of religions and races. This is interesting. Here we have an interesting collection of the fact that they see themselves as an empire. They kind of, as rulers of large portions of the world, they have to also rule many different places. Number 10, their bravery. Number 11, their poetic talent. This is important. Sultans did write poetry. Number 12, not having sought refuge in the court of another ruler. So at no point were they so desperate for help that they had to flee their lands and reorganize in another place. And this is a dig against the Mughals, who had to flee to the Safavids for a period. Number 13, their moral purity. Okay, again, number 14, their miraculous immunity from the plague and other illnesses that common people. And it's true, I don't think any Ottoman Sultan died from the plague. Not that this is miraculous, I think it's just a question of cleanliness and distance. 15, their noble ancestry, going back to the Turkic ruler Oğuz. So we can see by this point, only by number 15 do they kind of pull upon a sort of Turkic vision in the same way that they were in a way that was important back in the 1300s. They still have this in their minds. This isn't really the center. The fact that they're Turkic nomads, that they go back to the Oğuz tribe, doesn't really matter to them as much anymore. And again, as you can see, this that they're different from previous dynasties in this regard. They have a noble lineage. 16, their adherence to a noble Sharia. So it goes back to this Sunni Hanafi identity, that the fact that they hold up the Sharia, that they have state-sponsored madrasas, etc. Number 17, their unmatched breeding and dignified gravity, as well as their resistance to oppressing subjects. So they don't overly tax people and they ensure justice. Their maintenance of a full treasury, unlike the example of the Safavid ruler Shah Ismail, who merely left 60,000 aspers when he died. So they're much richer than the Safavids. 60,000 aspers is not very much, by the way. Probably the yearly wage of 100 workers or something. Their absolute power and ability to enforce imperial laws, even in remote areas, simply by sending written decrees bearing the monogram, in contrast to the Safavid Shahs and the Doges of Venice, who are subject to the control of prominent patricians. So they're relatively centralized. And this is important, that they see themselves as now able to control large swaths of territory rather directly. They can send out orders. They can ensure justice throughout their realms. And lastly, that the respect for individual property and the right of even a simple villager to accumulate money without any interference, unlike in the domains of the Safavid Shahs, who greedily and unjustly appropriated the income of their subjects. So what we have here is again, it's clear that the enemies of the Ottomans are the Safavids. That's who they're attacking the most. They also attack the Mughals indirectly, and to a lesser degree, the Habsburgs and the Venetians. These are who they see as competitors, who they want to insult and attack, and to define themselves against. So I think this list gives you a nice sense of how the Ottomans, at least the dynasty itself, saw its position in the late 16th century and why it thought it was a legitimate ruler. Now, how many of those are true or not, at the very least, it gives you a sense of their own vision of why their rule was just and proper.